Hello, how are you? We start a new chapter of our interviews or videos with experts. As you know, we conducted a series of interviews with experts within the New Ways of Working program of AEDIPE, the Spanish Association for the Management and Development of People. In this series, you have at your disposal our previous interviews in which we have spoken with our experts about what we are experiencing in the field of work, in the opportunities generated by the COVID pandemic as a social challenge. Now, today, we would like to talk about the risk due to employee stress, burnout, and anxiety in our companies. We want to talk about the mental health of our staff. For this, we have the participation of an international expert. It is, in fact, our first international collaboration in our program, New Ways of Working. We want to collect lessons learned wherever they exist. She is Wiebke Wilhelm-Welgemoed, Chief Operating Officer of ICAS World, a Lyra Health company in United Kingdom, responsible for the design, implementation, and oversight of all global business operations and client services. Hello, Wiebke.
Thank you very much, Louis. It's a pleasure to be here today and share some views around psychological health and comprehensive employee assistance programs with you.
Okay, thank you. But before we begin, I am also going to introduce Jesus Garcia, who is going to be with us during this talk. Jesus is a member of AEDIPE. Hello, Jesus.
Hello, Luis. Thank you very much, Luis. Thank you, Luis, for introducing us to the program, to the interview. And thank you very much, Wiebke, for being here with us today in our interview. And go ahead, Luis.
You already know, Jesus, that you can participate whenever you want to ask Wiebke questions or to make the comments you consider appropriate. So let's start, Wiebke, with the questions. Thank you very much for being with us today. First of all, we would like you to tell us what your field of activity is, what your experience is in the care of prevention of the mental health of company staff, or the resilience of people in their jobs.
Thank you, Louis. I am representing ICAS World, an organization that is providing comprehensive employee assistance programs at a global and at a local level. We specialize in working with employers to put together strategic programs that comprehensively address psychological well-being in workplaces. And we do so at global level, driven by global quality standards and global learnings and expertise. But we very much focus on the local delivery of such services, making sure that they're embedded in local culture, the local mental health system, and the local context. My personal background is as a psychologist. I'm a psychologist by training, and so a particular focus of mine is to really look at clinical quality that allows us to respond, but embedding that in a comprehensive approach at the same time.
Okay, so then what is your opinion about the mental health of the workforce? How it was taken care of before this pandemic at European level or Spain level, if you can?
Yeah, thank you, Louis. I think we have done a lot and we have come a long way over the years, especially if we look at the European context, if we look at the broader context. There's increasingly conversations around how to enhance mental health, the importance of mental well-being, the importance of psychological factors in workplaces, in productivity, etc. But it varies. And I think the danger that we're seeing at the moment is that we have increasingly guidelines. The EU has been very proactive to push sort of guidelines around stress management in the workplace, etc. But we got to be so careful that we're not moving into a space where it becomes more of a compliance exercise to drive mental health and just say, we've done it, it's okay, we've done enough, but that we really and actively look for opportunities to improve the psychological well-being of our employees. And what sits behind that is a good understanding of why we would want to do that. And this is something that applied before the pandemic. I'll talk about after the pandemic later with you. But when we look at that, it's so crucial that we understand that when an individual has mental health challenges, as we all do, a fight at home with your partner, children that are struggling at school, maybe a conflictual relationship with a colleague, or generally genuine mental health problems. And I think the old assumption is people are supposed to leave that at home come to work, be productive, and then they can deal with their personal issues again. We know they bring this into the workplace. And we know there are direct consequences that arise from this, which in turn have direct cost implications for employers. So it is really important for us to understand that. I'll give you a few examples of this, that if someone is having those kind of issues, they might be distracted. They might be more prone to errors, which are costly. So if you're operating machinery, if you're working in a safety-sensitive environment, for example, errors can be potentially very dangerous. Similarly, if I'm a supervisor or manager of someone who's distracted, who's having difficulties, I will have to manage that. I will have to spend my time as a manager dealing with that employee, but also the team, and that's time that I'm spending that I don't have for other duties and responsibilities. And then it's the obvious issues that arise from absenteeism, people missing work, not being at work, or presenteeism, where they are at work but not productive. And again, we're losing out on that. And if you're hearing and listening and going through those consequences, there are costs associated with that. And what that means is that we are seeing that mental well-being directly impacts on the costs of human capital, of people in the workplace. And I think that understanding we need to get to. It's not a compliance exercise. It's not a tick in the box. It is something that we need to do to look at our bottom line and to create attractive workplaces over and above that, where we attract employees, where we hold them, where we tie them to organizations to avoid attrition, to avoid recruitment costs, etc. So that's really something that I think has been there before the pandemic and something that we continuously need to work on. And perhaps one other comment, Louis, and just to jump in there with another thought, is the other issue is the stigma associated with mental health. That I think still to this day, it is much easier to say, I have a broken arm, or I have a cold, or I have back pain or something, but to say, I'm feeling down, I'm feeling hopeless, I'm feeling very anxious, I feel panicky. There's still a lot of thoughts around that you just have to pull yourself together. And when we look at the research of stigma across the world, what we're seeing is that a lot has been done in shifting stigmatization. We see the young generation is a lot more open to seeking assistance, but the one place where stigma is extremely stubborn is the workplace. And I think here there's a lot more we can do to address that. But I hope that gives you some broader answer to the question, but happy to move to the next one.
Of course. Let's talk about the pandemic and what's changed in the pandemic, because it seems like, the pandemic has accelerated a lot of changes, a lot of, projects that were in progress. And this, I don't know if you can say that this happened also in this area, in this field, because we are talking more and more about the mental health of the workers. Do you think it is
Absolutely.
It's true?
I think, Louis, you're spot on. I think we are certainly seeing how COVID-19 and the impact of the pandemic has highlighted the importance of mental well-being and mental health like it has never been done before. And in some ways, it has really allowed us to tackle some of the stigma, because everybody was affected. Everybody, whether you are the most senior person in the organization to the most junior person in the organization, everybody was impacted by the pandemic. And I think the awareness that was created around how it's not just our physical well-being that drives us and ensures that we can keep going, it's how we cope with situations like this never before happening pandemic into that scale has really helped us to put mental well-being on the map. And really driven that. So I think for us, it's really allowed us to shift that focus, not fully, but it has certainly done so. I think in terms of mental health, when we look at it more broadly, if we look at the worldwide statistics, I think what has been striking is that when we look at the initial phases of the pandemic, we had this upsurge of anxiety initially. So people very anxious. The situation has never been there before. And I've looked at the data for Spain as well, that we're seeing very similar trends in Spain, that initially there was this sort of anxiety that increased. Over time, we saw a shift where the levels of distress and strain increased. I think people juggling, being at home, multiple responsibilities, people with families, schooling the children, also taking care, being confined in small spaces, yet isolated from broader social structures, all of that started impacting. And I think we then saw an upsurge of depression over time, where people sort of the initial panic around the virus subsided, and then we were really seeing this sense of depression sinking in. What we haven't seen yet is an increase in suicidality necessarily. So if we look at the data, however, we're seeing a lot of psychological unwell-being and distress among people simply because of the unusual situation. And I think if we look at sort of the drivers behind that, one of the big drivers of that is the sense of loneliness, that people were isolated, that I think social structures are so important, how we live, how we engage, how we share, how we come together as a community, and that was cut off. And I think it has really pushed people into a very dark place sometimes, into a very difficult place. And again, how can we as workplaces intervene to address that, to drive that, to counterbalance that? And I think it's one thing to do it through calls, through meetings, through activities, etc. And it's easy to fall into those, but it's the comprehensive holding of a program that's available at all times that really allows us to bring a comprehensive solution to that.
Jesus?
Yes.
Yes. Sorry. I have a question. I think you have to remind me something about the phenomenon. Now we think in USA about the Great Resignation. What's your opinion? What are the possibilities of transferring this phenomenon to Europe, to Spain? What do you think?
Thank you, Jesus, for that question. Before I comment on the US specifically, perhaps an important comment is to make that responses will be deeply local, that we firmly believe that you cannot just take findings from one context and necessarily assume that they're going to hold in that particular context. I think especially if we look at mental well-being, if we look at the impact of the pandemic and broader, it is deeply local in the way that we, surrounded by our culture, by our social networks, our understandings of the world. So really important to keep that local focus. And but that doesn't stop us from learning from the international data, the kind of research, the kind of findings. And I think what COVID-19 has done is it has questioned the way that we've been living. And it's allowed us to question how we run our lives and how we see our workplaces. What is acceptable, what is not acceptable, because everything was changed. It opened our minds in some ways to really go back to the very core assumptions. We never thought life could be cut down in the way that it was during lockdown. We never thought we would see the day that a pandemic would bring to a standstill the entire world as we knew it. And this in some ways makes us sort of think, well, why can't we then challenge those things that we also think will never change, but maybe they can. So I think whether it ends up in resignations or whether it ends up in major attrition of employees in the workplace, we will have to watch the trends specifically for Spain and Iberia. But what we need to be cautious of is what are drivers behind it. I think with people choosing their life circumstances, being more particular about making good choices in the light of the fact that life is precious, it's important we create workplaces that actively try to keep them. So workplaces that are attractive, workplaces that are empathic, that are supportive, that build a workplace culture that is collaborative and caring, it becomes almost more important. And that all, I think, sounds very nice to have, and it sounds like really something we do when everything else is done. But it's becoming more and more important to really keep your key talent, and to avoid that people are leaving the workplace, and to do that comprehensively. And I think that's why that focus on comprehensively looking after your employees by having responsive programs that provide them access to support care, but embedded in a strategy that looks at your leadership behaviors and skills, and together with various other aspects of building culture. Together with evidence-based, proactive interventions that allow us to really understand where people are at, specific to that organization, specific to that team, specific to that particular environment, that will really allow us to start looking at it and really turn trends if they're existing and really make them better.
Let me ask you about something. Okay, the pandemic has changed a lot Okay,
Yeah.
we've gone through a pandemic.
Yeah.
I hope we are living the last days of the pandemic. The worst is back.
Hopefully.
Okay, but maybe the employees, the attitude of the employees now maybe has changed a lot. Okay, they cannot expect like, okay, let's be as we were before. No, maybe they expect their employers to carry forward the personal connection and care provided during the pandemic into the new world of work, into the future, into the present. No, maybe I'm talking about safety, flexibility, work of life balance, mental health. All of these topics now are, of the employees. They are talking about this. They are asking their employers, to improve these areas.
I think it's a good question, Louis. I think what the pandemic has really done, it's allowed us to question a lot of things and to ask those questions more loudly and to ask answers and for answers more directly. And I think that applies to workplaces as well. That I think before perhaps certain workplace practices were tolerated, they were accepted as how things are. But I think with the pandemic and the forced changes to people's lives, to people's workplaces, to people's environments, I think has really resulted in a broader questioning, as I mentioned, questioning the core assumptions that we're dealing with, but also really asking for more accountability from workplaces to support employees, to be present, to engage with employees more broadly. And I think thankfully we have had many workplaces that have done amazingly supportive work during the pandemic, looking after employees and driving that extensively. And I think the question is, why not continue like that? What are we learning from that? What is good? It's not that that's going to end. Also, I think it's almost wrong to think that we're returning to what was. The world has changed. And the world is a different place, and that's a difficult one to navigate. So that need for support, that need for empathic leadership continues. And I think perhaps I cannot stress that part enough, is the importance of leadership being attuned to the well-being of others, understanding what can trouble them, and really how to lead through that becomes absolutely critical. And I think that's where our work together with the HR community is so critical, to really look together at looking at driving leadership capability development and really driving empathy. So bringing those soft skills, bringing those skills that are linked into the mental well-being space really fully into the space of workplaces and driving that effectively.
Yes, of course, this pandemic has changed us in in ways that are not yet fully understood. We have to see what happens in the future.
Yeah.
It is becoming clear that there will be no return to normal, of course, in the workplace, as we are talking, with health and safety of employees at the top of the agenda for the last 24 months. The traditional employer-employee relationship, of course, has changed beyond recognition. Caring, connecting, and coping together has become the #1 focus for employers and employees alike. Do you think it's like that?
Yeah, I think it has to a degree highlighted that plight more, but perhaps not enough. And I think also what we got to be careful of is to leave it there, because I think there are very, very real mental health issues and needs that need to be addressed, and that will impact. And again, going back to the business case, going back to what I was talking about, how that's impacting. So I think we need to back that with programs, with access to support and care, and really driving that more comprehensively. And that's where I think programs like comprehensive employee assistance programs that really bring in mental health support, that offers access, and I think anonymity is really critical, because we're still dealing with that stigma. People don't want to know that others could, what if this person finds out? What if my employer finds out? So that is still simmering there, that we really need to make sure we have anonymity in programs, that we have access to help as people need it, because people respond differently at different points in time, and they don't always want to speak to a manager. So if we can create a workplace culture where it's okay to need help, where it's okay to reach out, and we make the services available that allow that 24/7. While in English we say you keep face, because nobody else will know that you're struggling in the background, but you can keep up your professional sort of appearance, yet you're receiving support and help in the background confidentially, through counseling services, through support by professionals. And at the same time, we learn from that. We learn from the usage, obviously, and keeping the data completely confidential, but learning from the trends that we're seeing there. And we can then say, together with HR, what are the things we need to address here? We're picking up anxiety, we're picking up depression, we're seeing stress here, we're seeing that, and develop programs that target that and are really based on evidence. I think that is something that I think will be very powerful in addressing some of the concerns.
Let's talk about the physical health. Maybe physical and mental health are connected, absolutely. Healthy workers are more productive, less stressed, and less likely to take sick leave, of course. A workplace that encourages employees to be physically active and stay well helps to create a culture of well-being that is very attractive to current and prospective employees. However, what the workplace looks like has been changed by COVID-19, with many people still working remotely on on-site facilities and available. What steps can employers take to ensure that they continue to look after their employees' physical and mental health, of course?
Thank you, Louis, and thank you for bringing together both physical health and mental health into this picture, because that really would be my first focus here. Is that, and you mentioned earlier, health and safety has been a great focus. Health is a broad concept, and body and mind are very, very closely interlinked. And I think because physical health is often more evident, it's more visible. And COVID-19 also has emphasized, obviously, how important it is to be physically healthy, to withstand the virus, to be strong and resistant from a physical perspective. But what we cannot underestimate is how important your mental strength and resistance and resilience is to cope with anything, whether that is COVID-19, whether that is the social context, whether it is workplace pressures. So really, really important that we are focusing on that aspect and we don't let it fall away, because we're focusing on activities. So activities are great. And I think doing exercise, encouraging people to exercise, because like the two are interlinked, if you exercise, it helps your body, it helps your mind, and it has a good positive impact on mental health as well. But without mental health, it's going to be hard to activate that. So it's really the interplay that we're needing to look at. When we look at what workplaces need to do, is it needs to be built into a comprehensive strategy. We cannot just offer a yoga class here online or a quick talk on stress management and think we have ticked that box. It is important that as an organization, we define what are we wanting to achieve? What are our key risks that we're addressing? Is it that we're wanting, like you said, Jesus, that we want to avoid people leaving the workplace? Is that our main concern? Is it talent that we're concerned about? Or is it loss of productivity? Maybe we've seen an increase in error rates, maybe we've seen an increase in absenteeism or similar. So what are the things that we're wanting to understand and address? And then to develop a strategy of how to do that. That strategy needs to incorporate, as I said earlier, not just an occasional check-in or support from management, but providing services to employees that they can use as they need to. Because people will respond differently. Today, employee so-and-so will have a crisis, they will not cope with COVID, or they have a personal crisis, etc. They will need help. Another employee is fine at the moment. They don't need it, but they might need it at 10 o'clock on Friday night, because that's when their crisis hits. We need to make sure that we provide 24/7 support that's local, that's in local language, that understands local culture, and that allows people to access help when they need to, and anonymously. So they do not have that worry that's holding them back. So this will allow that male employee that perhaps doesn't want anyone to know that he's having problems, because he's used to being the strong guy that holds everything together, etc. But he can pick up the phone and call and really receive support without anyone knowing. And I think when we start building stories and we then start bringing stories into the workplaces, we're starting to dismantle that stigma as well. And we're really getting people to care and support as we need to. Now, another part to the programs is that, so we need to be there at all times and allow people to access support when they need to, is that we don't want to leave it there. We don't want to just be responsive to problems that are already there. We want to learn from that and say, how can we prevent those problems occurring in the first place? And I think to really drive and make sure that we understand what are those kind of issues that we're seeing, that we're picking up. And here again, working together between your psychological sort of comprehensive EAPs and HR, looking at the different data sets that each generate and bring, gives us a unique view of the workforce as a total picture. And I think that's where, again, a program like a comprehensive EAP is so important, is that it gives insights into people's personal worlds without betraying the confidentiality of the individual, but on a group level. And that's a unique metric that we don't get anywhere else, that allows us to put the full picture, the full person together in our understanding and our development of what we want to do with that to retain talent and nurture it. And that's really where I think a comprehensive program becomes so important, embedded in that strategy, so we can go back to the business and say, this is what we've delivered. This is how we're impacting on those key success factors and variables that we've designed in our strategy, rather than just doing, like I said, a workshop here or a yoga class there. So it's not to say that they can't be part of that comprehensive program, but there needs to be a framework that overarches that altogether. So I hope that makes sense. Yes, Jesus.
Yes, sorry, I have a question, because you have been talking about key factors, and I was thinking about the principal stressors. We have been talking about the stress, about
Yeah.
anxiety, and for the managers, for the human resources managers, we have to manage concrete issues. And what do you think about the problems with compensation, with the lack of participation in decision making, lack of possibilities for professional development? What do you think are the main stressors in the field of mental health in our companies?
I think there are multiple factors that would impact on that. And I think there are a number of things that relate back to culture. We know that the relationship with your manager is one of the key drivers of potential stress and difficulties, or conflict in the workplace, interpersonal difficulties, etc. It is, we have the saying that people don't leave companies, they leave managers. And I think, again, going back to attrition, that would be a key factor. I think benefits, compensation, etc., are important factors. And I think but with that sense of fairness, of transparency, of care and support, feeling valued, I think those factors have increasingly come in. And again, going back to Louis's question, I think people have become a lot more conscious of that, aware of that, and feeling able that they can ask for it. I think we need to be it's very important that we drive those and really look at that. Other factors obviously are more environmental factors. I think if we look at those that continue working from home, that has brought a myriad of stressors that we didn't have before, that we didn't have to deal with. The lack of boundaries in the home environment, not having suitable workplaces. I think we do need to look specifically at women in the workplace differently, because and evidence is really quite strong coming post-pandemic, that women in particular were struggling particularly much with the balancing of childcare, work, feeling they needed to fulfill both requirements equally in those contexts, and yet being confronted in their own homes with both spaces. So there have been a number of additional stresses. Equally now, if we look at returning to work, we're picking up a lot of anxiety around that. People who are now used to working from home, coming back into workplaces, still being concerned around COVID-19 perhaps, so not feeling yet comfortable and confident to mix and to be in workplaces, yet feeling that expectation that they have to, that can lead to enormous stress at this particular point in time. So a myriad of factors that I think impact, and I don't think one area is going to fix it. We really got to look at that comprehensive approach and again, mental health or psychological well-being together with your very important HR interventions and focus areas, those remain. I think it's really just about packaging it in one package overall.
Finally, what do you think should be an approach, a complete program that develops the health and resilience of our staff? You've been talking about this, on this conversation, but maybe some tips, some items, fundamental elements that a program of these characteristics should have in our companies, maybe to finish.
Yeah, thank you, Louis. So I think for me, it's really to ensure that leadership fully buys into the idea, that commitment goes right from the top. And I think for HR to use that, and I think that's often the people that are most convinced and know and are fully aware of the need. And it's often important to position that with your leadership and to drive the business case behind EAP and comprehensive workplace programs of this nature, to really say, this is not a nice to have, this is not something we do when we have got nothing else to do, but it is essential to our functioning as an organization and for us to really look after our people. So that would be the first starting point, is to really create that setting. And I think HR is doing a phenomenal job in doing this in many environments. For us then, it's important that we then create a comprehensive strategy. So really looking at what are the kind of issues we're needing to address, what are the kind of key risks we're having in our environment, what do we need to address, and what are we wanting to do to address them. So it could be putting in a program like the 24/7 support that I've mentioned. It could be focusing on physical health activities. It could be, like you said, Jesus, some of the other interventions that focus on culture, compensation, benefits, etc., that really are reworking that comprehensively. But what is key for me in all of these is to continually look at opportunities to collect data to check that you're on the right path. So I think working evidence-based, trying to understand the data that are generated from programs and using that to further refine so that you know what you're doing is specifically working for your environment is critical. So there is not a generic one-size-fits-all necessarily solution, but it is important that we use data to evidence that, to take that back to the organization, because leadership will ask, what is the return on investment on this particular program, for example? And we need to have data to do that. And we need to have an approach to take that back. So for me, data is a critical component that I perhaps haven't stressed enough previously in my responses. And it's something that we are absolutely passionate about in driving and taking forward. So it's reporting, it's really looking at, and again, perhaps also again to emphasize finding local context-specific solutions that work for a particular organization and take into account the diversity of the workforce as well. I think that's another important aspect, is to not just employ diversity concepts that again come from the outside, but Spain, Iberia itself, a diverse environment with vast differences between regions and environments, to take that into consideration and work across that and bringing people together is another important component that I think cannot be stressed enough.
Mm-hmm. Jesus, do you have any more questions before we say goodbye to Wiebke?
No, because we are finishing our interview. Maybe Wiebke, do you have any phrase, any sentence to conclude our interview? I know that this is a very, very important challenge, but maybe you are able to tell us your conclusion.
I'm going to take a second to think about that, but I think, Jesus, perhaps what I would say is that I would love to first of all share my deep appreciation for being here today and for the focus that the association is taking on mental health. And I wanted to congratulate you on that, because I think that for me is critical, because you as an HR fraternity are so important in driving this message within Spain and Iberia more broadly, that I think that is a fantastic initiative. And we really, as ICAS, we are hugely proud to be part of that. And we just really want to wish you as a fraternity, and together with you, want to work with you to find solutions for your context, your environment, for Spain and Iberia more broadly. And we're delighted to be part of that. So if I can give you that as a long sentence,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
would be my response.
Thank you, Wiebke. This is not a sentence, but this is a good conclusion. Thank you very
Yes,
much.
perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wiebke, for being with us. Okay, see you next time. And I know that Adipe and you will work, so we will see what happens in the future. Okay, Wiebke, thank you so much.
Wonderful.
Okay,
Thank you
and
very much.
Thank you.
You
Bye.
Jesus,
too. All good. Thank
thank
you.
you so much, and to all of you that watch or listen to our episodes, thank you so much, and
Thank,
meet you in the next one.
thank
Bye.
you. Thank you so much. Bye.